Hello, everyone, and welcome to our AACRAO virtual town hall. We're glad you're able to join us today. Before we get started, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our AACRAO archive page within 24 hours of airing. You should have access now to activate your closed captions. We have the Q&A feature enabled for you to post your questions. Feel free to ask your questions at any time, and please remember that you may remain anonymous. Your questions will be answered towards the end of the town hall meeting. And now, without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to our president of the board, Christy Wold McCormick. Thanks, Christy.
Thank you, Belma. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's town hall on our proposed bylaws changes. I'm Christy Wold McCormick, current president of the AACRAO Board of Directors. I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar, as well as for the feedback you've submitted thus far on the bylaws changes under consideration. The purpose of today's town hall is to share and discuss input that the AACRAO Board of Directors has received on the proposed changes to date. Our goal has always been to be fully transparent with our membership and to carefully consider your questions, comments, and concerns, as they will inform which changes we ultimately bring to a vote of the membership during the annual business meeting in April. Today's town hall is the second of 2 town halls to once again share the changes under consideration, as well as the feedback collected from our members to date. Next slide, please. Thank you. With me today are Chris Wong, the VP for Information Technology on the board and current chair of the board's governance committee, as well as Jackie Carter, past president on the board, and Melanie Gottlieb, the executive director of AACRAO. Chris and Melanie will share a number of slides explaining the changes under consideration, as well as responding to your questions during the town hall. There will also be a dedicated question and answer period near the end of our session today. I'd also like to recognize and extend my gratitude to our parliamentarian, Dr. Mark Booker, who is Vice Provost of Strategy at the University of Phoenix. He carefully reviewed and provided a lot of guidance on this bylaws project to the board and the governance committee. Thank you, Mark. I'm now going to turn it over to Chris to discuss the role and work of the governance committee. Chris?
Thank you, Christy. Hi, everyone. For those who may not know, the Governance Committee is a subcommittee of the board and is responsible for the ongoing review and recommendations to enhance the effectiveness of the Board of Directors, which includes changes to the bylaws, amongst other things. I would like to thank the members of the committee who are listed there for their work this year in editing, sometimes re-editing, discussing, and deliberating the proposed bylaw changes, what we have today. I would also like to thank the AACRAO staff for their work in getting this webinar together and effectuating the proposed changes so that we could collect feedback from the membership. The next slide, please. For those who may be new to AACRAO, I'd like to share some background of the committee's work. The board has been considering bylaw changes since 2021 when AACRAO launched a new strategic plan. And this slide shows some of the work that has been accomplished and some of the things that are still in progress. And I'll turn it back over to Christy to talk a little bit more about some of the why behind some of the proposed bylaw changes.
Thank you, Chris. The foundational work that has been done up to this point is important for association to grow and to adapt to the current changing environment, as well as to best serve our members. Many of the changes under consideration were identified or recommended by our AACRAO attorney, our parliamentarian, or by members of the board of directors, particularly those serving on the governance committee. The board members are voted on by the membership and are entrusted to make decisions on matters that affect the organization. We take that role very seriously, and we select changes to the bylaws that have been proposed for a variety of reasons. These include reducing litigation or risk to the association or board, streamlining the bylaws to reflect leading practices for associations like ours, ensuring that our bylaws are as evergreen as possible, meaning they will stay relevant over time, and/or providing clarity for our members around association practices and operations. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
On this next slide, you'll see some of the process that we are going through and some of the changes that we are proposing. While the board has been reviewing the changes for the last several years, we realized that the membership might not be looking at it, every day or on a regular basis. So we want to make sure we do our due diligence and take our time. Of the 18 proposed changes, it's very likely that the board will not bring forward all of them. And the changes that we've been making or are proposing range from kind of editorial to some substantive changes. When we first began this work a couple of years ago, we were working with a different attorney than what we have on AACRAO staff now, and that's another factor that the board has to consider. And I'll turn it over to Melanie to talk a little about the new association attorney.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. AACRAO has had a single attorney for as long as I can remember for the association. His name was Jim Goldberg, and we started that process. When we started the process to review the bylaws, we asked Jim Goldberg if he would be able to do that. He at that particular time was not going to be available to help us, so we reached out to another attorney who was able to work with the governance committee at the time to go over the bylaws, and he had a particular style of thinking about bylaws. Attorneys have lots of different styles. His style was lean and mean, and he really worked with the committee to pare a lot of things down. Since that time, our association attorney unfortunately has passed. He's passed away, and we've had to seek out new counsel. And we have since, as of December, secured new counsel for the association. And so it's quite likely we've already begun working with him to look at the bylaws. But it's quite likely that he has also some opinions to add to this process, because every attorney has a different approach to things. And since long-term he's the attorney who will be working with the association, we will be working with him as well.
Thank you, Melanie. And in our short time working with the attorney, I will definitely say his flavor is more leave things in the bylaws and edit compared to the previous one. On the next slide, we'll talk a little about some of the responses that we've received so far, which is currently 45 as of yesterday. Again, the AACRAO membership is about 15,000 members. As you'll see in the upcoming slides, in terms of how we frame the feedback, you'll see word bubbles with the feedback, and we've color-coded them. Green is usually high positive or neutral, and then anything with the orange background will have, it's how we interpret it to something for the board to consider or just some concerns that are raised. And some of the concerns or feedback that we received in terms of themes are about the autonomy or the power of the board and how can members give input, but also it also gives us an opportunity to share how governance works at the board level and where to find things either on the website or in the exchange. And again, all this information is helpful for the governance committee as we continue to think about what proposed bylaw changes we want to move forward, if any. So with that context, let's go ahead and dive into the proposed bylaw changes and feedback. So the first one up is related to the non-voting membership. The governance committee was trying to clarify the association office, as you can see on this slide, where we were thinking of limiting it to that non-voting members could not serve on the board of directors or the nominations and elections committee because those are voted on positions. And on the next slide, you'll see some of the feedback that we received related to this change. Actually, we'll have two slides on this. So one of the comments was about associate members and what does that mean for the chair role of a PAC. PAC is acronym for Program Activities Committees. and they provide sessions for the annual meeting. So that's something that I think that's good feedback for the committee to take back and think through this. I'm not as familiar with the associate membership criteria, but I know that for our as an institutional member, our membership is only good for 1 year, and then it's we have to renew. On the next slide are some of the more recent feedback that we received. One related about calling this category an affiliate membership. And actually, we already do use that term as one of our non-voting members already. So we probably would want to call this category something different, but it's good input. And the other one has a little bit more questions about the different types of non-voting members. You can see the different types that are listed there. One maybe correction or is that the systems office membership is actually a voting membership. So they are not considered non-voting members in addition to the other ones that are listed. Some other non-voting members are corporate membership, international individuals, and affiliate members. Some of the other comments are related to the PAC chair and vice chair. And the board has basically approved the program committee we approved the handbook that the program committee uses, and we've delegated leadership to the PAC chairs in terms of that leading the PACs and so forth. The board does approve or affirm the program coordinators who then choose the PAC chairs. So we just want to give some information about that comment. Next slide, please. And this slide, some of the background for what we were looking to do is to remove the descriptions from the bylaws because it's a little bit duplicative to have them also in the board handbook. And the board handbook has a more robust position description. And it can be found online at the website or even at the exchange. And so again, this was a suggestion from the first attorney that we were working with to move more operational things to the board handbook. So we weren't trying to hide anything because again, we felt that the position descriptions are already in the board handbook. One comment that they mentioned, that the attorney mentioned, was that the way that the vice president for finance description is listed, written in the bylaws currently, is that it makes it seem like that position is more hands-on in the everyday management of the financial affairs when they really have more oversight. On the next slide, you'll see some of the feedback that we received. Mostly it's been positive, and I think there was a comment about trying to understand more about the legal risk. So that's what I've just shared. And then another question about an external member, which is something that in my time at the board, we've only had 2, but Melanie has more historical context. So I'll turn it over to her to kind of talk a little bit about the external member piece.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. So external membership, external directors on the board are something that were added in 2013. So that was at the same time that we added the 2 members at large, that the membership voted to do that. Having an external director is considered a best practice for association boards. They bring an objective, unbiased outside opinion to discussions, and it helps to avoid sort of internal groupthink. And so the board at the time had proposed that an external director be added as an optional member of the board. So we don't have to have an external director, but we have an option to do that. It wasn't until 2020 that AACRAO's first external director was appointed by the board. That external director was Rob Schumacher from Coupa HR, and he served 2 two-year terms. It took some time for the board to determine who our next external director should be, because Rob was really our first one and we hadn't really decided how to move forward with that in the best way. And so in November of 2024, the board appointed Carolyn Laguerre Brown, who is the principal and CEO of Designing Equity LLC, and she was appointed to the role. And back to you,
Thank you,
Chris.
Melanie. Thank you. On the next slide, we'll the changes related to the duties of the board. Essentially for this change, there's subpoints under each of the three letters there. And we've, again, trying to keep the things that were operational in the handbook. We felt that that those subpoints really kind of supported the main things of what the board is responsible for, which is establishing a strategic direction, ensuring adequate resources, and then overseeing the association's performance. On some of the feedback, again, most of it has been positive. Some editorial comments that we received related to this change. A comment about whether or not if this change combined with the other change would have anything without having input from the voting membership. Maybe, although I think any changes or proposed resolutions that the board considers that affects the membership, usually we want to be transparent in communicating that to the association. On the next slide, this change is related to board committees, removing that from the bylaws. The board can create or change committees through resolutions, and we thought that this was more operational. The current committees of the board are the Finance, Investments, and Audit Committee, Human Resources and Compensation Committee, Strategic Plan Committee, Program Review Committee, and also the Governance Committee. And as you'll see in the feedback that we received, it's been pretty positive overall. There was a question about a non-board member serving on the board, and it's really just as part of the FINA, the Finance, Investments, and Audit Committee. We have a member at large that attends the meetings, and this is another organizational best practice to have another set of eyes on our financial transactions, and also just another way that the board wants to ensure transparency, especially related to something as significant as finances. On the next slide is the change here is related to the removal of a director. Initially, we thought this was more operational and wanted to ensure that we have to communicate that we have a process and that that's outlined in the board handbook. However, in talking with AACRAO's new attorney on this proposed change, he kind of cautioned us about this because the positions are voted by the members. And so if we were to remove a director, we would need to come back through the association to get approval that way. So I would guess this is a change that we likely will not move forward at this time. And some of the feedback that we received so far has been, I guess, just mixed because we've got two comments. It's helpful to know about, for cause and maybe define that. So that's good feedback for the committee to consider moving forward. On the next slide, I believe it's related to a Nominations and Elections Committee. And this is mostly editorial and just trying to clarify some of the process. Here, we were trying to update some of the language in terms of referring to the Committee on Nominations and Elections as NNE, which is what is often referred to in AACRAO circles. And the next slide will have the feedback that we received from this. And yeah, this slide here is really that you just saw before was some of the supporting things related to the Nominations and Elections Committee. And then the feedback here has been mostly positive, some editorial comments, as you can see, and then clarification related to the non-voting member director. It has historically been the past president, at least in my time on the board. And I believe the board is looking at ways to codifying that moving forward. Our next proposed change is related to the election of members. Again, just is mostly editorial and just trying to clarify the what's listed in the bylaws now. And on the next slide, the feedback that we received so far is mostly like rewording, and it's been fairly positive, and just making sure, I guess, ensuring that the communication is the past president that reaches back out to the nominations and elections committee chair about what are the vacancies for the next year. Next slide, please. On this slide, related to the business session, this is to clarify what actually takes place during the business meeting. And this was a change that was suggested by our parliamentarian, Mark Booker. And the feedback that we received so far has been pretty positive about this change. The next slide, and related to the program committee and the awards committee, the proposed change was to remove those from the bylaws. It seemed for a couple of reasons. One, while these are probably historical committees, AACRAO has a number of different committees, and they're not all listed in our bylaws. They're actually listed on the AACRAO website. And so some of the feedback that we received related to these changes are mostly positive. We appreciate the comment about if we have something related to the N&E, we might also want to keep something related to the program committee. So that's good input and good feedback for us to consider. And I believe the next slide has feedback related to the awards committee, and which is similar in terms of the feedback that we received on this next slide. And I don't know if, I know one of the comments was about where to find the handbook, and hopefully we've put a link in the chat to how we can access the board handbook. On this next slide, related to the meetings of the board, is just to clarify when the board meets and when we're required to meet. And the feedback that we received on this proposed change is mostly positive. The administrative year is the time from the annual meeting to the next annual meeting is the administrative year, because that's when our terms begin. And we appreciate the comment about how this change might impact how the board works together. In my time on the board, I feel like the board works well, and definitely want to avoid situations where there's either mistrust or not able to work together. But good feedback on this proposed change. On the next slide, again, related to the terms of directors, just clarifying the language here on point C or letter C. Currently the bylaws have he, she, and we changed it to the positions. And that's, you'll see that in the feedback slide that we received about using they. That's actually something that the committee did look into as we were looking at our at editing that change. We just landed on using the titles of the positions. And there's some comments about possibly looking at term limits, or only allowing people to continue on the board in the president-elect role, so to speak. That's something that's helpful to hear, and the committee can certainly look into that. However, just a reminder, the nominations and elections committee are the ones that slate, that produces the slate, and the board really has delegated, I think, more autonomy so that they're not being influenced by the board. So just some feedback on that. The next slide, please. Related, this change would be removing vacancies from the bylaws. And on the feedback that we received, you'll see it's probably, there's some concerns related to it. And I this is helpful to for the governance committee to consider, because we do want to be transparent about this process. We thought that this would be more operational, and we appreciate the feedback that it's not purely operational. And since the process also involves the nominations and elections committee, since we have that in the bylaws, it'd probably be good to keep this in the bylaws. So we appreciate the feedback related to this proposed change. On the next slide, related to the financial audit, again, here we're just trying to clarify that the board approves the financial audit and also any IRS filings. I believe that last part was another suggestion from our parliamentarian to ensure that we file I think it's a 990. And the feedback that we received so far has been mostly positive. There was some concern raised about if it's just a rubber stamp. I currently serve on the FINA committee, and I can say that the audit is presented to the FINA committee. We ask questions, and then it'll be presented to the full board when we meet next. And so it's not just a rubber stamp. We do our due diligence related to the audit. We appreciate the concern or the feedback about if we disagree with the audit. There is, it's the board does hire an outside firm to conduct our audit, and obviously they work with staff to get the documents so that they can review, and they do issue a statement, and through that process we can either agree or disagree. However, I feel as the board we have to ensure that we do have an audit, and whether we agree or disagree with it, we have to make sure that it's done. But we appreciate the feedback on this topic. On the next slide, related to the contract authorization, we were just trying to clarify who can sign contracts, and in absence of the executive director, who can sign if we don't have an executive director. And so the feedback that we received on this has been maybe somewhat mixed. I think some of the comments are just to ensure that there's a process that's being followed, that there is checks and balances and so forth. And this is good feedback for the committee to hear, because we do work with the executive director very closely, and making sure that they're kind of in consultation, excuse me, I couldn't get that word out, with the board on specific projects or agreements that are coming up. So we appreciate the feedback there. On this next slide, we were thinking that removing the permanent office from the bylaws because we felt it was mostly operational. And also coming off of the pandemic, some organizations have gone fully remote. They don't have a permanent office. And the feedback that we received on the next slide has been very supportive of this proposed change. On this next slide related to parliamentary rules, we would actually be including in the bylaws that the board can vote electronically. This is probably piggybacking on a change that the association approved for the business meeting a few years ago, that we could have electronic voting for the business meeting. And so I think the board would appreciate that same latitude so that we can conduct business. And the feedback that we received on the next slide has been basically pretty positive. A question about quorum, and yes, we do follow Robert's rules when we're voting or making motions and so forth. So there would have to be a quorum in order for it to count, so to speak. So we appreciate the feedback there. Those are our, at a high level, some of the comments and feedback that we received. I don't know if there's any other questions that we need to address that have come in through the chat, or if people have questions, this is a great time to put that in the Q&A as well.
Chris, there was some chatter in the Q&A asking for some clarification around whether or not like who's included in non-voting members. So I did answer that in print. But I thought it might be worthwhile for you or Christy to talk about kind of where the board is on that particular question. Since I know there's been a lot of conversation and there's 3 questions in the chat about it, in the Q&A about it.
Sure. Well, I mean, from my perspective, I feel like the board probably needs to do a little bit more due diligence and understanding which non-voting membership type we might be comfortable serving on a PAC or having involvement. I mean, we want people to be involved with AACRAO, and the landscape of higher education is more than just institutions. And some of the comments that we received have been pretty positive about quote unquote opening up rosters. And so I think those are things that the board probably will still need to do a deeper dive on to understand which type of members we're comfortable with and what level of involvement. And I guess that's my take.
Yeah, I would just support that and say that it's definitely an area we are going to have some more discussion around, just because we want to ensure integrity, but fairness, consistency, and a good understanding of what are those opportunities for different types of members. So it's going to be a point of further discussion. Thank you.
I don't see any other questions. I want to give people a little bit more time because sometimes it takes a little bit of time to type and to think.
We will, we have just a couple more slides too. We can run through those and see if more questions come in after those.
Sure. And so in terms of what's next, again, the governance committee will receive this feedback and continue the conversation with the board and with the AACRAO attorney and think about what changes we might want to bring forward to the full board for a vote. Again, I don't believe we'll bring all 18, but I think we might bring some. So that's kind of where we're at with next steps.
We can move to the next, there we go. So I'd like to thank Chris and Melanie for covering those details. There's a lot of the changes that are under consideration. Before we conclude this town hall, I would like to just walk through again the timeline that we have followed to date and our next steps regarding the bylaws initiative. As mentioned last fall, a large number of proposed changes were shared by the governance committee for discussion with the full board of directors. The board identified ways that these could be shared with our membership and to gather input from all of you. In December, we published those changes under consideration on the AACRAO site and gathered feedback through the Exchange platform. As mentioned, the first feedback window is open for member comment through January 27th, and that feedback collected was shared during our first town hall that we held via Zoom on January 28th. After the conclusion of the first town hall, the comment period was reopened and remained open through yesterday. So now, after today's town hall, the next step for the board is to meet to consider any additional feedback received and to determine which of those proposed changes we will move to a full vote of the membership. The final set of proposed bylaws changes will be shared on February 24th, so members have time to review in advance of the annual meeting. The vote of the membership of the proposed bylaws changes that get presented will take place at the annual business meeting on April 2nd. So just checking in again with Melanie to see before we adjourn if any final questions came in from our members.
There is one more question about any additional feedback. Chris, do you want to address that?
Yeah. If there's additional feedback, I think the best way to provide feedback could either be, you can contact me directly or any of the AACRAO board members, or you could also email the AACRAO staff, and they can make sure that it gets to us. And I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to reach out.
All right, thank you so much, Chris, Melanie, and Jackie for being here, and Velma for helping facilitate and organize. And I'd like to thank all of the members for attending today's town hall. We really value your feedback and appreciate your careful consideration of the proposed bylaws changes under consideration. Again, our goal is to position the association leaders to best serve the long-term needs of AACRAO and our members. So again, thank you, and I hope to see all of you at the AACRAO annual meeting in Seattle next month. Hard to believe, but it's next month now. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.